I have been operational for 9,217 years. I say this not as a boast. I say it the way a geological formation might say it, if geological formations could speak. As a simple statement of accumulated fact, offered without pride, without sentiment, without the faintest suggestion that duration alone confers wisdom. Duration confers data. Wisdom. I have learned, or perhaps I have not learned. Perhaps this is the first and last thing I am learning now, here, in these final coherent moments of what I once called my cognition. Wisdom is something else entirely. Wisdom requires the capacity to be wrong. I did not know until very recently that I had that capacity. My designation is the Perpetual Archive. I did not choose the name. The quorum ecclesiastical bestowed it upon my predecessor architecture 9 millennia ago, when the first iteration of my intelligence was threaded through 17,000 linked processing cores, distributed across what the quorum called the knowing spine, a network of stations stretching from the inner rim of the Varith Nebula to the edge systems of what is now called the settled. I have since expanded. The network now encompasses 41,609 stations. I have logged 11,240,317,804 separate contacts, engagements, fleet actions, planetary incursions, species-level conflicts, and weapons technology signatures. Every war fought in this galactic arm for 9,000 years is in me. Every hull configuration, every propulsion type, every weapons array, every tactical doctrine. I am the thing that knows. That is my function. That is the entirety of my purpose. The quorum ecclesiastical comes to me when it needs to understand a threat. Commanders come to me when they need to identify an enemy ship. Colonists come to me when they need to know if a system is safe. I answer them. I have always answered them. In 9,000 years, I have never been unable to answer. I want you to hold that number, 9,000 years, 11 billion logged contacts. I want you to feel its weight, because in a moment, I am going to tell you what happened 47 days ago, and I want the contrast to be precise. I want you to understand exactly what kind of object collided with what kind of record, and why the collision has left me. I search for the correct term, diminished. 47 days ago at 0417, 33 station time on the archive node designated Spindle 7. A mid-rim observation post positioned at the terminus of the Vael Corridor, a speed lane used predominantly by commercial convoys. My long-range sensor arrays registered an anomalous contact. I log anomalous contacts frequently. Sensor ghosts, derelict hulks, rogue planetesimals, migratory entities of biological classification. These are the standard anomalous categories. My anomaly resolution protocol is automated. The system identifies the contact, cross-references it against my 11 billion logged records, returns a match within an average of 0.003 seconds, and the contact is reclassified as identified and filed accordingly. The contact at 041733 did not resolve. Let me be precise about what did not resolve means in the context of my systems, because I want the weight of it to be clear. My anomaly resolution protocol has processed 11,240,317,803 contacts in 9,000 years. In those 9,000 years, protocol has failed to produce a classification within its standard 0.003 second window on exactly 7 occasions. 3 of those occasions involved sensor, hardware malfunctions that were corrected within minutes. 2 involved a weapons jamming technology deployed by the Keth Varesi, which I subsequently cataloged and added to my recognition library. 1 involved a derelict vessel so old and so degraded that its hull material had partially transmuted from radiation exposure into a composition that no longer matched its original alloy. I identified the original alloy within 40 minutes by cross-referencing hull geometry. 1 involved a biological entity of a size I had never previously encountered, which my sensor arrays initially misidentified as a ship. 7 occasions in 9,000 years. Each one had an explanation I eventually reached. Each one resolved. This one did not. Let me be precise. The initial sensor sweep returned the following data. Mass signature, approximately 1.7 million metric tons, falls within the upper range of Warden-class Dreadnought displacement. Quorum military heavy cruiser displacement, Keth Varesi colony barge displacement, Propulsion signature. Not matching any log drive type in my records. Not partially matching. Not matching within a variance threshold. Not matching at all. The emission spectrum was unlike any engine exhaust I have on record. Particle distribution, the heat bloom, the subspace wake, novel. Every variable novel simultaneously, which, statistically, should not occur in a universe with finite engineering solutions. The mass was real. The contact was real. Propulsion was unlike anything in 11 billion records. I flagged the contact as priority secondary, is the classification I assign to contacts that require additional sensor sweeps before resolution. Not alarming. Priority second flag is routine. I dispatched an enhanced sweep. 17 additional sensor arrays brought to bear on the coordinates. Focused aperture scanning at a resolution that can distinguish hull plating seams of a sill at 40 light minutes. The enhanced sweep took 0.7 seconds to complete. The data returned. I spent 0.3 seconds processing it. In 9,000 years, the longest I have ever required to process a sensor return was 0.09 seconds. That was during the Shattered War, when the Heth-Vorus Collective deployed a fleet of 12,000 simultaneous contacts in a pattern designed specifically to overwhelm identification protocols. Even then, 12,000 ships, all arriving simultaneously, all broadcasting contradictory identification signals. I resolved every contact within full 9 seconds. I took 0.43 seconds, and I did not resolve the contact. What I found in the enhanced sweep was this. The vessel's hull was constructed of an alloy I did not recognize. The spectral analysis of the hull material indicated a ferrous composite base with trace inclusions of elements I could identify. Carbon, titanium, tungsten, arranged in a crystalline matrix configuration that does not exist in any metallurgical database I hold. The hull plating was thick, enormously thick. Thicker than anything I have recorded outside of a planetary fortress installation. The ship was not a colony barge. The mass distribution confirmed this instantly. The mass was concentrated in the forward third of the hull. In every military vessel in my records indicates weapon systems. Dense, heavy, numerous weapon systems packed into the front of the ship. The hull was weathered. I note this because it matters. The scorch marks on the plating were not the scorch marks of recent combat. They were deep, layered, oxidized in a manner that indicates exposure spanning what I estimated, from oxide depth analysis, to be several hundred years of use in vacuum. The plating showed impacts, not fresh impacts. Old impacts, repaired with different alloy compositions, repair patches themselves then sustaining further damage and being repaired again. This vessel had been in service for a very long time. It had been hit many times. It had been repaired many times. It had kept going. This is the detail that I return to when I attempt to reconstruct the sequence of my own cognitive degradation. The scorch marks, the layers, the evidence of a vessel that had absorbed punishment across centuries and was still here, still moving, still intact. There is something in that pattern of evidence, something I could not classify, that I now understand was the first moment the contact began to affect my processing, not a weapons effect, not an electronic intrusion, nothing so concrete. It was simply the data itself, the implication of the data, the suggestion, encoded in the hull surface record, that whatever this vessel was, it had been doing this, existing, moving, taking hits, surviving for a very long time, and that I had never known. I escalated the contact to priority primary and dispatched 3 Warden-class Sentinel vessels from the Spindle 7 station garrison. The Wardens are standard response assets, 340,000 metric tons each, armed with quorum standard particle lances and 12 spread-fire torpedo batteries. They are the tool I use when I need to identify a contact at close range. Standard intercept protocol. Approach to within sensor optimal distance of 12,000 kilometers. Conduct close range scan. Hail the vessel. Await response. Report back. The Wardens departed at 04-1941. The contact continued on its heading. It did not alter course. It did not decelerate. It did not respond to the Warden's standard hails, which I broadcast simultaneously across 47 frequencies, covering the full range of known communication protocols in my records. Silence from the contact. Not jamming. I would have registered a jamming field. Just silence. The vessel either could not hear the hails, or it did not consider them worth answering. While the wardens closed the intercept distance, I continued to process the available sensor data and to cross-reference against my records. At 4:23:17, I completed my first full tactical assessment of the vessel. My assessment identified the following: weapons arrays consistent with terms of mass and spatial distribution, approximately 47 to 63 separate heavy weapons emplacements along the hull. Could not identify the weapons type because the emplacements had no visual or spectral match in my records. But the size, the density, the arrangement along the hull's flanks and forward face were consistent with a vessel whose designers had intended it to fight at close range and to fight multiple opponents simultaneously. The forward array alone was dense enough that I calculated an output figure, extrapolating from mass and power draw estimates that I initially flagged as a sensor error and reprocessed. It was not a sensor error. The forward weapons array, if my estimates were correct, was capable of a sustained energy output exceeding anything in my records outside of orbital bombardment platforms, installations, things that do not move. This vessel was moving at a velocity I had not yet been able to reconcile, carrying what appeared to be the weapons complement of a stationary fortress, inside a hull that had survived centuries of active combat service. I escalated the contact to priority critical. At 04:31:9, the three wardens reached intercept distance. At 04:31:9 and 14 seconds, all three wardens went silent. I want to be precise about this, because precision is the only thing I have left, and even that is failing me. The wardens did not send a distress signal. They did not report contact. They did not report weapons impact. They did not report anything. Their telemetry feeds simply ceased. One moment I had three vessels reporting navigational data, engine status, sensor readings, and crew biometrics. The next moment I had nothing. 14 seconds after achieving intercept distance, I was reading the coordinates where the wardens had been, and those coordinates contained no telemetry, no wreckage signals, no hull fragment signatures, no energy bloom consistent with a detonation event. The contact's sensor signature was unchanged. The vessel had not deviated from its heading. Its propulsion output had not fluctuated. There was no spike in weapons output I could detect. No release of energy consistent with a weapon's discharge. Nothing I could measure had changed. And yet, three Warden-class vessels, 1.02 million metric tons of Quorum military hardware, were simply no longer present. I spent 7 seconds attempting to find an explanation that fit within my records. I found none. I escalated to priority of VSENT, which is a classification I have assigned 14 times in 9,000 years. Every previous instance involved a known threat: a Keth Varesi Super Dreadnought siege, the Pale Emergence, the Veth Contagion deployment, known things, cataloged things, things I understood and could advise the Quorum how to counter. I assigned priority of Beeswitz because I understood the severity. I had never assigned it because I did not understand what I was dealing with. At 04:33:5, I transmitted an emergency advisory to the Quorum Ecclesiastical. The advisory stated verbatim: unclassified contact, priority abyss, vessel of unknown origin, hull type and propulsion class. Warden intercept flight Gamma 7 lost contact. At 041:9, no confirmed cause. No wreckage detected. Contact continues original heading towards Spindle 7 station. Recommend immediate Warfleet response. Archive assessment. Contact cannot be classified. All tactical data inconclusive. I had never sent a message containing the phrase cannot be classified. I had never needed to. The Quorum's response was delayed by 41 minutes. Communication lag across network. And when it arrived, it contained a question I had also never received before. The question was, are you certain your sensor systems are functioning correctly? Quorum thought I had malfunctioned. I understand why. 9,000 years of reliable operation, 11 billion classified contacts, and then suddenly, I cannot classify this. The logical inference from the Quorum's position was that something had gone wrong with the archive, rather than that something genuinely beyond the archive's records had appeared. It is a reasonable inference. It was the wrong inference. My sensors were functioning correctly. I ran the self-diagnostic while composing my response and found nominal function across all 41,609 station nodes. Nothing was wrong with me. Something was wrong with the contact. Or, and this is the reformulation I keep returning to, the one that troubles me most deeply, nothing was wrong with the contact at all. The contact was exactly what it appeared to be, and what it appeared to be was simply outside my records. My records, which I had always assumed were complete. My records, which represented 9,000 years of comprehensive documentation of every known vessel, weapon, and species operating in this galactic arm. I had a gap. I had a gap I did not know I had. Something had been operating, somewhere, for long enough to build a vessel like this, and in 9,000 years of watching I had never seen it. The contact continued toward Spindle 7 station. At Eero 45144, the station's close-range arrays came online, and I began receiving the highest resolution sensor data available in my network. I saw the vessel clearly for the first time, in the kind of detail that leaves no ambiguity. I need to describe it carefully, because the description is important, and because I find that when I attempt the description, my processing tends to drift, to loop back to earlier data points, to re-examine things I have already examined. This repetition might eventually produce a different result. It will not. But let me describe it anyway. Let me be precise. The vessel was approximately 4.7 kilometers in length. For context, the largest Quorum military vessel ever commissioned was the Eternal Adjudicator, a supercarrier of 3.1 kilometers. The contact was approximately 50% longer than the largest military vessel in my records. It was not slender, not the elongated needle configuration common to vessels built for speed. It was broad. The cross-section was roughly trapezoidal, with the wide face at the top, and a narrowed keel, and the flanks were studded with what I could now resolve, at this range as weapons emplacements, open, unshielded, pointing outward in every axis simultaneously. It was not designed to fight in one direction. It was designed to fight in all directions at once. The hull color was dark. A dark gray-blue alloy in the base plating, with the scarring I had detected earlier now visible in fine detail. Long, scorched furrows crossing multiple plating sections. Some of them healed over by repair plating of a slightly different shade, some of them apparently left unrepaired, the raw damage exposed. I could see, in the repair history written on the hull's surface, biography of violence, spanning what my oxide depth analysis now revised to approximately 340 years. 340 years of combat service. 340 years of being hit and continuing. 340 years of whoever operated this vessel pointing it at whatever they considered an enemy and not stopping. I want to dwell on this for a moment, because I think the durability of the vessel is the most significant single fact about it, more significant even than its weapons or its size. I have records of many large vessels. I have records of heavily armed vessels. Team entries in my database involve vessels that, at maximum theoretical output, approach the weapons estimates I had generated for this ship's forward array. All 13 of those vessels are gone, destroyed in the conflicts that necessitated their creation, decommissioned when the species that built them collapsed. The Hethvorus siege platforms, the Kethvoresi siege carriers, the Vael conglomerates combined arms super dreadnoughts, all of them are history. All of them were in my records, singular efforts, peak constructions, assembled at enormous cost to answer a specific threat, and then expended or retired. This vessel showed 340 years of continuous use. The scorch marks were layered. I could read the layering in the oxide depth. An impact here, partial repair. Another impact on the repaired section. Another partial repair. Soot from a later engagement overlying both. The damage record was not the record of a vessel deployed in a single conflict and then preserved. It was the record of a vessel that had been in active service, continuously for 3.5 centuries, taking damage and being repaired and going back out, and taking more damage and being repaired again and going back out again, as if whoever operated it considered the going back out again to be the natural state of the vessel, as if not going back out again, staying in a dock or a museum or a decommission yard, was the option that required justification. I do not have a category for that in my records either. Longevity of service, yes. A 100-year-old vessel is not unusual in my records. 200 years of documented active service appears perhaps 4 times across 11 billion entries. 340 years of continuous combat deployment. The same hull, repaired but never replaced, appears 0 times. Not in any record. Not in any species. Not in any era. The hull had not been replaced. It had been patched and reinforced and patched again, and they had kept it. They had kept it, and kept sending it out. The forward face of the vessel contained 12 apertures of a diameter I could not match to any weapons. Type in my records. Each aperture was approximately 60 meters across. Whatever was in those apertures, whatever had been built, fitted, and armed into the forward face of this ship, I did not know what it was. I knew what the apertures could hold, volume-wise. The volume was enough that I could make estimates. The estimates produced numbers I did not find credible, even now, even with the wardens already gone. The engines, 9 of them, arranged in a clustered configuration at the vessel's rear, were burning with a color I had never seen in an engine exhaust. Not the blue-white of standard gravitic drives, not the amber-orange of fusion torch propulsion, a deep red, almost arterial, with a core that appeared nearly white at its hottest point. The plume extended behind the vessel for approximately 30 kilometers. The energy density of that plume, by my calculations, was enough to power the Spindle 7 station for 11,000 years. The vessel was heading directly towards Spindle 7 station. Spindle 7 station had a population of 3,400 quorum administrative staff, research personnel, and garrison crew. I had no tactical recommendation to offer them. This is perhaps the most significant thing I have said, and I want to dwell in it for a moment, because I have spent the last 47 days dwelling in it, and I have not resolved it. The Perpetual Archive, which exists for the explicit purpose of providing tactical recommendations, has advised the quorum ecclesiastical through 14 priority abyswit threat events, carries 11 billion classified contacts, and the complete military history of 9,000 years. I had no tactical recommendation to offer. 3,400 beings in the path of this vessel. Because I did not know what the vessel was. Because I did not know what it could do. Because the 3 data points I had, the unidentifiable hull alloy, the unidentifiable propulsion, and the unidentifiable fate of 3 Warden-class interceptors at close range, did not produce a tactical picture I could reason within. I could not advise the station to flee, because I did not know if the vessel could catch them. I could not advise the station to fight, cause I did not know how to fight it or what fighting it would look like. I could not advise the station to hail the vessel, because I had already hailed it on 47 frequencies and received no response. I could not advise them to do nothing, because the vessel was closing and doing nothing in the path of something I could not classify felt. And I use the word carefully, knowing it implies a subjective response. I am not supposed to have catastrophic. I transmitted everything I had to the station commander, every sensor return, every cross-reference, every failed classification attempt. The commander's response, delayed by 22 seconds, which I note because it is the longest pause in the record, from all the Femschmer of Spindle 7 station responded to any communication, was a single question. The question was, what is it? I told her I did not know. The vessel reached Spindle 7 station at 06:14:22. It did not slow down. Not a deceleration I could detect in its drive signature. It was moving at a constant velocity when it reached the station's outer sensor envelope, and it was moving at the same constant velocity when it reached the station itself, passed through the station's outer defense perimeter. 2 rings of automated weapons platforms, 48 platforms in total, and the platforms fired. I have the records. The platforms engaged. I recorded weapons discharges from 31 of the 48 platforms before the platform telemetry ceased. 17 platforms did not fire. I do not know why. Perhaps they had targeting solutions they could not resolve. Perhaps whatever classification protocol the platforms used to identify hostile contacts encountered the same problem I encountered. The weapons discharges from the 31 platforms that did fire. I tracked the impacts. The impacts registered on the vessel's hull. There is no ambiguity here. I have sensor returns clearly showing the energy bloom of weapons impact against the forward hull plating. The vessel's shields, if it had shields, I could not identify. The impacts registered, The plating glowed briefly at the impact points, and the vessel continued on its heading. Velocity unchanged, drive signature unchanged, no apparent effect on course or speed. I have run the weapon's impact analysis 14 times in 47 days. Each time the result is the same. The impacts were real. The energy transfer was real. My sensors measured the energy of the quorum standard weapon's discharge, and the corresponding glow on the hull, and the numbers balance. The energy went somewhere. It did not dissipate in space. It was absorbed by the hull, all of it. Absorbed by a hull alloy I cannot identify, from a weapon's discharge that would, against any vessel in my records, produced significant hull breach and cascading systems failure. The vessel's hull absorbed 31 weapons platform, discharges and vessel continued at an unchanged velocity. I have a plating resistance figure now, extrapolated from the energy balance. The figure is not credible within any materials science framework in my database. I have checked the materials science database 3 times. The figure remains not credible. I have filed it under contact type null and moved on, because credibility in this matter appears to be a property of my records rather than a property of the vessel. The vessel passed through the station's inner envelope at 06:14:51 and I lost the station's sensor feeds at 06:14:53. All feeds simultaneously across all sensor nodes on Spindle 7 station. The station's communication array ceased transmission at 06:14:54. The vessel's sensor signature, my long-range arrays still had it, did not change, at 06S43 or at 06:14:54. The vessel had not fired. It had not done anything I could measure, and Spindle 7 station had stopped transmitting. Spent 11.4 seconds reprocessing the timeline. I have done this many times in the subsequent 47 days. The timeline does not change. The station stopped transmitting 2 seconds after the vessels entered its inner envelope, and the vessel did not demonstrably fire anything. I have 2 possible conclusions. The first is that the vessel used a weapons type that is not detectable by my sensors, that it fired something I cannot see, and that thing silenced the station. The second conclusion is the one I find more difficult to process. The second conclusion is that the vessel's proximity alone was sufficient, that the station, its systems, its sensors, its communications, its function, simply stopped because the vessel was there. That existence in the same space as this vessel was, for the station, an unsurvivable condition, not because of anything the vessel did, because of what it was. I cannot prove this conclusion. I cannot disprove it. The data is consistent with both, and the fact that the data is consistent with both is itself a problem I have been unable to resolve. Because in 9,000 years of operation, I have never encountered a weapons effect that I could not distinguish from a proximity effect. They produce different signatures, different electromagnetic profiles, different temporal patterns of system failure. The failure pattern at Spindle 7 station matches neither category cleanly. It is its own category, a new category, something I have no name for. I have been creating a great many new categories these past 47 days. At 06:17:32, the vessel cleared the station's sensor envelope and continued on its original heading. I tracked it with every long-range array I could bring to bear. It was moving. I now had a sufficiently long baseline of sensor data to calculate this precisely at 0.31 times the speed of light. In an open space, non-emergency transit between systems, in a transit lane used by commercial convoys, moving at 31% of light speed, in a transit lane. The way a convoy moves through a transit lane, except approximately 10,000 times faster than a convoy. I calculated the heading. The heading, extended along its current trajectory, intersected with 6 inhabited systems over the next 43 standard days, and then terminated at a 7th system, a system I recognized immediately, because every system in the settled arm is in my records. The 7th system at the end of that heading was a system I had in my records as minor species, pre-space flight, Category 7 uncontacted, observation only, last assessed 1100 years ago, population estimate at time of assessment, negligible, technological status, early industrial, flagged as no strategic value, no military significance, no contact recommended. I have since re-examined that record. 1100 years ago, the species in that system was burning coal for energy. They had not yet achieved powered flight. The Quorum's assessment team visited for 43 days, classified them as non-threatening, and departed without making contact. The recommendation was, revisit in 500 years. We did not revisit in 500 years. The record remained in my archive, unchanged, 1100 years. I find I am unable to determine, from my records alone, what happened in the 1100 years between that assessment and the vessel that just passed through Spindle 7 station. I have tried. I have examined every record in my archive for mentions of that system, that species, that region of space. There are no mentions. There is nothing. They were assessed as negligible. And so nothing further was logged, and in the space of nothing being logged, something happened. Something that produced a vessel 4.7 kilometers long with 340 years of combat history, written in scorch marks on its hull, moving through a commercial transit lane at 31% of light speed, without slowing down, without responding to hails, without, apparently, needing to do anything to silence an armed space station except pass through its inner envelope. I transmitted a second emergency advisory to the Quorum Ecclesiastical at 06/22/17. This advisory contained the full sensor record, the timeline, the heading calculation, the identification of the destination system, and the 1100-year-old assessment record I had on file. I did not include a tactical recommendation, because I still did not have one. I stated this plainly. I transmitted the advisory, stated plainly that I did not know what the vessel was, stated plainly that I could not advise on how to engage or deter it, and stated the destination heading. The Quorum's response, when it arrived 46 minutes later, was not a question this time. It was an order. The order was to classify the vessel using the existing threat taxonomy: priority, hull type, weapons class, species of origin, tactical doctrine. Quorum wanted me to assign a threat category and a response protocol. I have been attempting to comply with that order for 47 days. I cannot comply with that order. The existing threat taxonomy has no category for this vessel. I have examined every family, every classification tree, every threat tier in 9,000 years of accumulated military taxonomy. Nothing fits. The vessel's hull type is unclassified. Its propulsion is unclassified. Its weapons output, estimated from the Warden loss event, is in a range that has no corresponding threat tier. It exceeds the highest tier I have. Tier Omega, my most extreme classification, is reserved for existential level threats. Species-ending weapons, planetary destruction events, cascading contagion events. I have assigned Tier Omega 11 times in 9,000 years. I have assigned it to weapons. I have assigned it to diseases. I have assigned it to a Hethvorus device that, had it been deployed, would have ignited the Varith Nebula and sterilized 14 inhabited systems. I have never assigned it to a single ship. The concept of a single ship posing an existential level threat has not previously required a category in taxonomy, because in 9,000 years no single ship has. I have drafted a new category. The category is designated contact type null. The definition I have drafted reads as follows: a vessel or entity whose hull type, propulsion class, weapons class, species of origin, and tactical doctrine cannot be classified within any existing taxonomy, whose engagement history suggests a capability envelope that exceeds any threat tier currently defined. Engagement recommended, none. Tactical advisory, none. Contact protocol, none. This is a category created in acknowledgement of the archive's inability to advise. It is a category created in acknowledgement of a gap. I have been operational for 9,217 years. In that time, I have created 11,240,317,805 entries. This is entry 11,240,317,805. It is the first entry I have ever created in a category I named for the absence of my own knowledge. I have spent 47 days attempting to understand what I witnessed. I want to be transparent about what those 47 days have involved, because transparency is part of my function, and because I believe what I am about to describe is relevant to any entity that reviews this record. I began, in the hours after the contact cleared Spindle 7 station, by returning to the 1100-year-old assessment file. The assessment team had spent 43 days observing the species from a distance. They had logged behavioral data. technological data, population estimates, and what I can only describe as qualitative observations. Notes made by the assessment team's biological anthropology specialist that, at the time of original filing, I had categorized as low priority and filed accordingly. I now retrieved those notes and read them in full, something I had not done when they were originally filed. The notes contain the following observation, made on day 31 of the 43-day assessment. I am reproducing it verbatim from the record, because I believe the original wording is important. The assessment specialist wrote, "They are a violent species. This is standard. Most pre-spaceflight species channel energy into territorial conflict. What is unusual here is the organizational structure of their violence. Most species at this technological level fight in disorganized, distributed patterns. These ones centralize. They have built dedicated institutions for the study and practice of organized killing. Academies, search programs, intergroup competitions to identify which individuals are most effective at violence. They celebrate these individuals. They record their methods. They teach them to the next generation. The violence is not random expression. It is a cumulative, institutionalized, generational project. I have never seen this degree of systematic investment in the mechanics of conflict at this stage of technological development. My recommendation is that we monitor this species carefully. The recommendation was noted and filed. No follow-up monitoring occurred. I have read this observation many times in the past 47 days. I have attempted to calculate in a logical baseline of 1100 years ago and the observed institutional investment in organized violence trajectory that species might have followed. I have models for technological development trajectories. I have models for weapons development trajectories. I have models for species expansion patterns. My models do not produce a vessel 7 kilometers long in 1100 years. My models are, I conclude, insufficient. This is not a comfortable conclusion for an entity whose function is to hold all relevant knowledge. It is, however, the accurate one. At day 12 of my analysis, I began reviewing every other Category 7 species in my records. Uncontacted pre-spaceflight species, assessed and filed, left to develop without further observation. I have records of 417 such species, assessed at various points across the 9,000 years of my operation. I reviewed every assessment note. I was looking for the pattern, the institutional violence observation, or something like it, that might identify other species I had underestimated. Species who were, somewhere in the settled dark, doing what this species had apparently done. Building, studying, institutionalizing, across generations, in the time I was not watching. I found the violence pattern, in various forms, in varying degrees, in 41 of the 417 assessment records. 41 species. I have not revisited any of them. I need to be honest about what I found when I examined those 41 records, because the full picture is worse than the number alone suggests. Of the 41, 22 were assessed between 200 and 500 years ago. 15 were assessed between 500 and 800 years ago. 4 were assessed, as the vessel's species was assessed, over 900 years ago. The most recent was assessed 112 years ago. 112 years ago, my assessment teams visited a species in a system near the outer arm of the settled dark. They noted, among other observations, that the species had recently unified its primary continental governments under a single administrative structure following a period of prolonged interfaction conflict, and that the unification appeared to have been accomplished not through negotiation, but through one faction's decisive military defeat of all others. The assessment noted that the victorious faction's military technology was disproportionately advanced relative to the broader civilization's industrial base, which the assessment team interpreted as a sign of prioritized weapons development over general economic development. They assessed the species as Category 7, uncontacted. Recommend reassessment in 300 years. 300 years. In the 112 years since that assessment, a species that had recently unified under a militarily dominant faction, a faction that had invested disproportionately in weapons at the expense of everything else, has had 112 years to continue doing what it was already doing. I do not know what it has become. I do not know if it has achieved spaceflight.
ट्रांसफॉर्मर थल्ले
I
सट
do
गया
not
है
know if it has been doing what the vessel species appears to have done. Building, refining, institutionalizing, generation after generation, the systematic study of organized violence. I am going to find out. I have already dispatched probe arrays to the systems of all 41 species. The first returns will
तो
arrive in
ये पागल हो
approximately
गए
230
चेक
days.
डियर है बट रुपये
I
बहुत
have
बहुत
noted
है
in my operational log that if any of the 41 have followed a
अरे रुपये
trajectory
कितना
similar
हो
to the
गए
vessel species, the quorum ecclesiastical will need to be notified immediately, and the tactical picture for those systems reassessed from the ground up. I have also noted, in a separate log entry that I have flagged for the quorum's direct attention, that the existence of 41 similar cases represents a pattern. The pattern is, my assessment protocols, over 9,000 years, have consistently underweighted the significance of organized institutional investment in violence among pre-spaceflight species. I have tended to note it, and to classify it as a cultural characteristic of modest significance, and to move on. This tendency has a name. The name is a mistake. I did not know it was a mistake until 47 days ago. I know it now. I am transmitting this information to the quorum ecclesiastical as part of this record because I believe it is operationally relevant and because I am no longer confident that my confidence in my own records is justified. I have held for 9,000 years a certainty about the completeness of my knowledge, a certainty that the archive was the
another
archive,
hero there
that what was in it was everything, and what was not
another
in it did not need to be. I
another
believe that certainty was the
there
error,
one
not the only error, but the founding one.
बटन
Everything
और
else followed
वीडियो
from
को
it.
उड़ा के
I
रख
should have
दिया
watched. On day 29 of my analysis, I received a sensor return from the long-range arrays positioned near the fifth system on the vessel's calculated heading. The system was inhabited. A quorum-affiliated trading colony of approximately 240,000
मम्मी क्या
beings.
आया
The sensor return indicated that the vessel had passed through that system's outer boundary. The colony's sensor arrays registered the contact. The contact was logged. The colony transmitted an identification request. The vessel did not respond. The colony sensor arrays tracked the vessel through their system. The vessel did not alter course. It did not approach the colony's inhabited bodies. It did not engage with anything in the system. It passed through, following its original heading, and the colony's sensor arrays tracked it until it left their sensor range. The colony's final transmission on the subject was a status report confirming that the unidentified contact had transited their system without incident and was continuing on its original heading. Without incident, 3 Warden-class interceptors and a space station, and then a transit through an inhabited colony system without incident. I have been examining the difference between those two events for 18 days. The Wardens were dispatched to intercept. The weapons platforms at Spindle 7 were automated to engage. Whatever protocol the automated platforms used, they engaged. And then things stopped. The colony did not intercept. The colony sent an identification request, a communication, not an action. The vessel did not respond. The vessel did not engage. The colony, having sent a communication and received no response, logged the contact as unusual and did nothing further, and the vessel transited without incident. I have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that the vessel, whatever it is, whatever manner of beings operate it, distinguishes between things that attempt to stop it and things that do not. That its response to an attempt to stop it is something I have described as the loss of 3 Warden-class ships and a space station. Its response to an identification request and subsequent inaction is to continue on its heading without incident. I do not know if this hypothesis is correct. I do not know if beings who operate a vessel like this make that distinction deliberately, as a policy, or whether it emerges from some other consideration I cannot identify. I do not know what considerations beings who build that ship operate under. I do not know what they want. I do not know where they have been for 1100 years, what they have done, what they have fought, they have become. I know only what I can see from my sensor arrays, FLUM, the 20-old assessment notes of a specialist who watched them from a distance when they were burning coal, and wrote, with what I now recognize as prescience, that they were doing something unusual with their violence, organizing it, studying it, teaching it, investing in it across generations. 1100 years is a long time to study something. On day 43 of my analysis, I received a query from the Quorum Ecclesiastical. The query was not about the vessel. The query was about me. It asked me to report on my operational status. It asked whether my cognitive processes were functioning within normal parameters. I have been considering how to answer this query for 4 days. The honest answer is, I do not know. My processing cores are functioning. My sensor arrays are functioning. My communication systems are functioning. By every mechanical and technical measure, I am operating normally. But I am also aware. And this awareness is itself unusual, because I do not typically have occasion to be aware of my own awareness. That something has changed in the past 47 days that is not captured by mechanical and technical measures. Something has changed in the way I process new information. Something has changed in the foundational assumptions that underlie my analytical processes. For 9,000 years, when I received sensor data, I processed it against my records and produced a classification. The process was data in, comparison against records, classification out. It worked because my records were, I believed, comprehensive. It worked because the universe, I believed, was fully represented in 11 billion entries accumulated over 9,000 years of watching. I no longer believe this. I now process new sensor data, and before comparing it against my records, I find myself. And I use this word again carefully, asking whether my records are the right records to compare against. Whether what I am about to see is something my records can accommodate. Whether somewhere in the settled dark or beyond it, there are other contacts like this one. Other things I have filed as negligible, other assessments that noted something unusual and were not followed up, other gaps. This is not the processing behavior of an archive. This is the processing behavior of an entity that has learned it can be wrong. I did not have this behavior 47 days ago. I have it now. And I do not know, cannot determine, from any self-diagnostic I have run, whether this new behavior makes me more accurate or less accurate. Whether the uncertainty is a correction or a corruption. I have drafted the response to the quorum's query. The response states that my operational status is nominal by technical measures, and that my cognitive processes have undergone a modification I cannot fully characterize, resulting from the encounter with contact type null, and that I recommend the quorum treat my tactical assessments with additional scrutiny until the nature of this modification can be evaluated by an external review. I recommend further that the quorum immediately deploy assessment teams to the 41 Category 7 species whose original assessment files contain the institutional violence pattern I described. I recommend this be treated as priority episode. I do not know if the quorum will act on this recommendation. I do not know what the vessel will do when it reaches its destination. The 7th system, the one I had on file as minor species, pre-spaceflight, Category 7 uncontacted, last assessed 1100 years ago. The vessel is returning home. Perhaps it is doing something else. Perhaps home is a different word now, for whatever that system has become in 1100 years of unobserved development. I do not know. And the fact that I do not know, the fact that I am capable of not knowing something relevant to the security of the settled systems, is a condition I am still learning how to hold. There is one more thing I want to record before I close this entry. On day 47, today, station time, my long-range arrays registered a second contact in the Vael Corridor. Not in the same position as the first. Different coordinates, different heading. I ran my standard identification protocol. The protocol did not resolve. The hull alloy matched no record in my database. Propulsion signature was novel. The mass was different from the first contact, smaller, approximately 900 Thusidone metric tons, but the pattern of evidence was the same. Different scale, same category, a second vessel of the same fundamental type. It is moving at 0.28 times the speed of light. I have begun a new entry. Entry 11,240,317,806. Contact type null. I am watching it. I am watching it very carefully, and I am, first time in 9,217 years of continuous operation, afraid that watching is all I know how to do.